Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Compromising information on him, as fake news intelligence chiefs have reportedly been unable to verify the claims which Russia has dismissed as utter nonsense. This has provoked a number of tweets already from Mr. Trump. He said, for instance, intelligence agencies should never have allowed this fake news to leak into the public. One last shot at me. Are we living in Nazi Germany? I win an election easily. A great movement is verified. I wonder if you said vilified, actually. But anyway, verified, and crooked opponents try to belittle our victory with fake news, a sorry state. Russia has never tried to use leverage over me. I have nothing to do with Russia. No deals, no loans, no nothing. Russia has just said the unverified report paid for by political opponents is a complete and total fabrication, and this is all uppercases to show how angry he is. Utter nonsense, very unfair, a total political witch hunt. Well, our US correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter has been following this.
Just days before Donald Trump becomes commander-in-chief, a bombshell. It's been revealed that during a classified briefing last week, US intelligence officials told Trump about the existence of an unverified but potentially damaging dossier, mostly compiled by someone claiming to be a British former MI6 agent, now working as a private consultant. It alleges that the Russian government has been cultivating, supporting and assisting Trump for at least 5 years, among other things, feeding Trump and his team valuable intelligence on his opponents, including Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. It claims that Russian intelligence possesses compromising personal information on Trump, sufficient to be able to blackmail him, including recordings of graphic sexual acts that were gathered when he visited Russia. President Barack Obama was also shown details of the dossier, which Sky News has not verified. Separately, Obama had already ordered a full investigation following Russia's attempt to interfere in November's elections by hacking individuals and organizations like the Democratic National Committee.
I ordered a report about Russia's involvement in the hacking of the DNC and passing on that information to WikiLeaks because I felt it was important, now that the election was over, for everybody to understand exactly what happened in order to prevent it from happening again.
As is his habit, Trump almost immediately issued a tweet about the newly published allegations. Fake news, a total political witch hunt, he said.
Nobody has sourced it. They're all unnamed, unspoken sources in the story, and it says it was based on a Russian investigator.
But these claims will fuel ongoing criticism that Trump's attitude to Moscow and Vladimir Putin is too generous. Even after being told of Russia's meddling in the elections, he tweeted, "Having a good relationship with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing." And once, he even publicly invited Russian hacking.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
According to the Guardian newspaper, the FBI applied for a special warrant to monitor 4 of Trump's team members suspected of irregular contact with Russian officials. Still, the agency is under pressure to explain exactly how it's handling these explosive allegations.
I would never comment on investigations, whether we have one or not, in an open forum like this. So I really can't answer it one way or another.
Trump has always denied having any secret connection to Russia. But whatever the truth of the claims, they will dominate the coming days, a scandal the president-elect can ill afford. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News in New York.
Let's go to Moscow. Our Russia correspondent John Sparks is there. John, just looking at some of these tweets from Mr. Trump, he's clearly outraged at the very notion that somehow this has happened. The Kremlin seem to share that sense of indignation too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Difficult to think of a worse way to start your presidency, isn't it? We've got these detailed allegations of meetings between Donald Trump's team and senior Russian government officials, the suggestion that Russians tried to offer Donald Trump lucrative commercial deals, and then again this allegation that the Russians hold compromising material on Donald Trump himself personally in the form of explicit sex videos. It's pretty extraordinary stuff. As you say, the Russians have denied it. They've emphatically denied it. A former head of the Russian intelligence services, the FSB, was rolled out this morning to say they don't hold any compromising material on Donald Trump. And a bit later, we heard from Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman. He called the whole thing a fantasy, a fabrication. Although, interestingly, these documents, this dossier says that Dmitry Peskov was one of the key figures driving a Kremlin operation to denigrate Hillary Clinton and promote Donald Trump's chances in the election. We've also heard in the last hour or so from Russian state media. They've begun to comment on this story. And of course, the Russian media is dominated by the state. They own virtually all of the television stations and newspapers here. Their commentators have called this dossier unprofessional. They say that respected media is not touching it. They say the author of the dossier changes the font all the time in the documents, and they say it's fake news designed to further confuse people. I don't think the Russians are going to be able to wave it away that easily. There's a lot of detailed information in this dossier. Some of it will be checkable, much of it won't be, but some of it will be checkable. And I think that these allegations will dog Donald Trump for some time to come, possibly even years.
Yeah, part of the problem, John, I suppose, is that some of the allegations, particularly the more salacious ones, actually do pass a sort of plausibility test. I mean, you can think back to several examples during the Cold War when honeypotting, so described, was seen as a legitimate tool of espionage.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's not just during the Cold War, during Soviet times. I mean, last year, for example, a former prime minister called Mikhail Kasyanov, who heads up an opposition party called Parnas, he was filmed conducting an affair in his own flat via a series of very sophisticated audio and video devices. That footage was then passed on to a Kremlin-friendly television station called NTV. That footage was then broadcast 2 months before the parliamentary elections, and the opposition movement basically split, and Kasyanov's career is over effectively now. So yes, this stuff does happen. Kasyanov blamed the FSB, the intelligence services, although they didn't comment. These allegations in this dossier, they certainly won't come as a surprise to him. And I have to say many other opposition figures, businessmen and dissidents as well.
Thanks, John. Putting more out on those allegations, which Donald Trump strenuously denies. Our US correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter, is in New York for us there this morning. Hannah, welcome to you. He's working himself up, Donald Trump, into quite a lather, and actually his indignation seems to be shared by the Kremlin.
Yes, that's right. Robust denials all around. But of course comes just as Trump is preparing in a few hours' time to face the press in his first press conference since July. But as you say, he is working himself into quite a rage about these newly published allegations. Here's the series of tweets he sent out in the last hour. Russia said the unverified report paid for by political opponents is a complete and total fabrication, utter nonsense, very unfair, exclamation mark. Russia has never tried to use leverage with me. I have nothing to do with Russia, no deals, no loans, nothing. I win an election easily, a great movement is verified, and crooked opponents try to belittle our victory with fake news. A sorry state, another exclamation mark. And finally, intelligence agencies should never have allowed this fake news to leak into the public. One last shot at me. Are we living in Nazi Germany? Now, it is extraordinary enough that the President-elect of the United States would have to, at this point, 9 days away from inauguration, say that he does not have a corrupt relationship with Russia. It is even more extraordinary, really, that he has to use the Kremlin statement in order to defend himself, and then compares the country he's about to lead to Nazi Germany. But as I say, this could not have come at a worse time. This is what his surrogate and his incoming chief of staff, Reince Priebus, had to say about the swirling allegations.
This guy is a paid political operative. It's not like he's a guy that's in the intelligence community in the UK. This is a guy who retired, opened up a shop, gets paid by political operatives to go dig up dirt and create these memos. This is not an intelligence document. An intelligence document doesn't have handwritten page numbers on the corner. It's not that. And the other thing I can tell you is if this was actually something our intelligence community believed in, it would have been published for the public in the rest of the report that was available to the public. So obviously it wasn't credible enough for them to actually put in a document for the public to see.
And Hannah, just on some of those Trump tweets, I mean, it wouldn't ordinarily be the case that we spend a lot of time on close textual analysis of these tweets, but it's very interesting. You're saying he's in a rage. I used the word lather. Just look at one of those tweets there in which he says, I win an election easily. A great movement is, it says verified. I wonder if actually he meant to say vilified and the predictive text corrected it to verified, because that doesn't quite seem to make sense, does it? But either way, he's pretty angry.
He is, and the context to this, or the separate context to this, is that at this very moment, all of the nominees that he put forward to form his cabinet when he becomes the president are undergoing really tough confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill. The next important one just so happens to be his pick for Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who was a former ExxonMobil CEO, a Texas oil man with very, very close ties to Russia, and Putin himself had in fact been awarded several honors by Moscow because of the nature and the closeness of his relationship. His pick by Trump raised eyebrows, outrage on both sides of the aisle, calls for an investigation into Tillerson's relationship with Russia, which is why these newly published allegations, unverified allegations about Trump and his relationship with Moscow really could not have happened at a more difficult time for President-elect Trump.
Hannah, can we just briefly throw forward to what's going to happen a little later on, this press conference, ostensibly to address some of his business commitments. How will it work? How free will journalists be to say, actually, we want to talk to you about maybe Russian involvement in the presidential election?
Well, the beauty of press conferences, as you know, is that once you're up there in front of the microphone, you are fair game. I mean, the Trump team is pretty good at choreography. They will have probably decided on a series of American journalists that they want to give first questions to, but there's nothing they can do to stop people shouting out. And once Trump is there, he is open to all of the questions that come his way, unless he cancels the press conference or walks off the stage. These allegations will absolutely dominate proceedings, and I suggest that questions won't stop until there is some satisfaction that Trump has answered them to the best of his ability. As you say, there is the point of this press conference in the first instance was to describe how Trump intends to separate Trump, the businessman, from Trump, the leader of the free world. But he's also going to be asked about his cabinet. He's going to be asked about his children and his relationship with Jared Kushner, who's going to be senior advisor to the president, and whether or not that constitutes any conflict of interest.
OK, Hannah, thanks very much indeed. 4 o'clock, our time for that press conference. It should be very, very interesting, shouldn't it? Let's go live to Moscow. There we can speak to Natalia Palavina, a former aide to Prime Minister Mikhail Kaznyov and now an opposition leader in Russia. Natalia, welcome to you. Is it inconceivable, do you think, inconceivable that Russia's security services might seek to entrap somebody who's got political ambitions in Moscow?
Not only is it not inconceivable, I'm absolutely certain that this is what is going on and has happened to Mr. Trump as well. This is very much the method of the FSB. I myself have become victim of that method of collecting compromising information against both enemies as well as friends. This is what FSB has been doing for decades. In fact, back in the day when it was still KGB, it was very much the same game. Okay. And earlier, well, a year ago almost, a very personal video of myself and former Prime Minister Kasyanov was aired on television right before the the local parliamentary elections. There is no doubt in my mind that it was FSB who were behind the video that was then shown. So this is very much
was that politically ruinous for him?
It was very damaging. Absolutely, yes. It definitely affected the outcome of the parliamentary elections in Russia. Absolutely so, yes.
Yeah. I mean, just to be...
yeah,
go on. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to continue to say that there's no doubt in my mind that there is some kind of information on Donald Trump that was collected back in the moment when Russian Kremlin didn't know exactly who to bet on in the American elections. Eventually, they made their choice, and I'm certain that there was a very much a serious effort to try and affect the outcome of the elections. And I'm sure there's something against Donald Trump that FSB has now, and they can use it, whenever they feel like it in the future.
Okay, you may feel certain of that. I think we ought to stress that certainly Donald Trump's people are making the point vigorously that this is absolutely unverifiable, and until some proof is produced to the contrary, that's where the matter rests, I suppose. Natalia, can I talk to you more generally about Russian public opinion about Trump right now? We're days away from his inauguration. We've got this first press conference he's going to give really since he was pretty much elected in the next 2 or 3 hours or thereabouts. How much interest will there be in what he's got to say?
Well, there will be a lot of interest. He's still very much headliner in Russia. The initial enthusiasm has worn off a little bit since the new voices are coming in and being heard now that it's not going to be as pink and beautiful and all friendly as Russian people were made to believe initially for a whole bunch of reasons. So there is less of enthusiasm. However, there is still hope that once Trump is in the White House, relationship will develop in a very positive tone in the future. So I think all eyes will be on this inauguration, and Trump is still very much one of the most talked about people in Russia.
Yeah. And if we were to stop 20 people on the streets of Moscow behind you and say, do you think that Donald J. Trump is in the pocket of Vladimir Putin, how many people would say, yeah?
I think quite a few would find pride in saying yes, they think so. It wouldn't be 10 out of 10, but I believe that I don't know, about 7 people or so would say yes. This is how great Putin made Russia to be, that we actually control America now. Some people, including some politicians in Russia, have said exactly that. Believe it or not, that we finally conquered America. So there is that crazy to me point of view out there, but it does exist.
Natalia Pelevina, very good to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Is with me. We are waiting to hear from Donald Trump, who is preparing to hold his first news conference since being voted into power. Ahead of that, the president-elect has been denying reports that Russian agents hold compromising information on him. Sam, this is at Trump Tower, I believe. First time he's held a news conference since he was elected. What's he going to say?
Well, he's got 2 major areas, I think, to address. The first is going to be the release of these alleged intelligence documents onto the internet over the last 24 hours, which could come from anywhere. They've been completely unverified. I think they're a very good example, and maybe used by him as an example of how the mainstream media may be suckered into covering stories that simply aren't true. There's no evidence to back up the content behind these documents. Nonetheless, they make allegations. Except
the journalist stands by what he said.
The journalist stands by what he says, but he has no verification for it. So
not that he's sharing.
Not that he's sharing. So, but essentially, the document suggests, and why it's so successful is it suggests something that certainly Donald Trump's critics are happy to believe, and that is that he has become somehow compromised by his alleged relationships in Russia, alleged sexual activities in Russia of a fairly dubious nature, and dubious business practices with Russia. That's the one set of questions that he's going to be facing, I think, probably immediately at this press conference. The other sort of connected will be the intelligence community's allegations that the Russians did indeed try to manipulate the outcome of the US elections. Now, he's been publicly dismissive of those allegations, publicly dismissive of the intelligence community from whom he's had briefings outlining those allegations, outlining in detail the confidential, the secret material that led them to make those allegations. He will be pressed by the media on that and to why there is this schism opening up between him and, frankly, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. 17 intelligence agencies have endorsed the view that Vladimir Putin did try to affect the elections, and including the Brits. In fact, a lot of the initial intelligence, as you are hinting there, actually came from Britain to support that argument. And then there is going to be the question of his son-in-law, who is being tipped to be, has now been appointed, or at least nominated as a senior advisor, and others, including himself, in terms of their conflicts of interest. They have a lot of business dealings, both his son-in-law, who's independent of Donald Trump.
Okay, let's talk about him. Jared Kushner, he is married to his eldest daughter.
Yeah.
I think I'm right in saying that. They were separated for a little while. They're back together again now. Had a new baby earlier on last year. He's going to have a senior role. He's going to have a senior, he's going to be the senior policy advisor in the Trump administration. Now, the Trump administration, or the administration-elect, if you like, is arguing that there is no conflict of interest here in terms of nepotism within the White House. There are arguments likely to continue on Capitol Hill over that during he doesn't need to go through a nomination process that we've seen, for example, this afternoon. The nominee for Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, is actually undergoing a grilling right now in the Senate. Kushner won't have to do that, but there will be questions posed to his father-in-law in this forum as to his business dealings. He's got a big business deal on the cusp of some kind of result with a massive Chinese investment group over property in Manhattan right now, for example. Equally, the Trump empire has businesses all over the world. It has businesses in China. It is alleged to try to get business off the ground in Russia. It's got businesses in the Middle East and so on, mostly through selling the branding of the Trump name. And he will be asked questions over whether he can divest himself sufficiently of this very big international business in order to act in the interest not of Donald Trump and the Trump empire, but of the American people. So I think those are the sort of three main, somewhat connected areas that he'll face. But I also say that, interestingly, I've been listening to Rex Tillerson's nomination grilling Secretary of State,
yeah, Secretary of State, and he's been quite interesting in that he is in some ways stepping away a little from the positions taken by Donald Trump, certainly on Twitter. I think most importantly, certainly for a Secretary of State nominee, digging in his heels absolutely under pressure from senators questioning him on this, saying, do you or do you not agree that the norms of international law need to be observed? And by that they mean, should the Russians be condemned for the illegal annexation of the Crimea? And he's saying yes. Not the same as Donald Trump.
Okay, you're watching Sky News. Elect Trump. We've got a whole host of people that we can chat to. Obviously, we've been hearing from Sam. Also with us now is Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes, a Republican Party commentator. And from Washington, we're joined by Niall Stanage, who is associate editor at the US political website, The Hill. Let's go straight to Washington to start with, should we? Niall, thank you for joining us. What do you expect to hear from the president-elect?
I think it's going to be a very combative performance from the president-elect. Obviously, there are all these allegations swirling around. They're unverified. He has already hit back via his preferred medium of Twitter against those allegations. So I would expect he will really be pretty aggressive in that pushback and in his general performance today.
What are you expecting?
I'm actually hoping that he's not going to spend too much time on the Russia stuff, and he's going to tell us...
He's going to, though, isn't he? He's going to go mental over the Russia stuff.
Well, you know what? I'm really hoping that he's not, but that's just a hopeful wish. But I hope he's going to tell us he's decided to divest, because if he doesn't divest, there are going to be some serious problems.
OK, we've got someone else to join us now, Edward Lucas from the Centre for European Policy, analyst and author of a book on Putin's Russia. Also joining us, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon as we wait to hear from the president-elect. Let's see how long it takes him. If it takes him as long as President Obama used to in order to have news conferences, we'll still be here at 7 o'clock. Let's see what happens. What are you expecting from President-elect Trump when he does finally speak?
Well, I think we'll probably get a lot of bluster, and that to me is rather like the advice when you're in a hole, stop digging. And I think he's in trouble already because of his habit of blustering when faced with allegations rather than giving a sort of coherent, sober response. I think your previous speaker was quite right. If he started off by saying, I am divesting all my business interests, putting them in a blind trust, that would immediately reduce the sting of one of the allegations, which is that his business empire has some kind of dubious ties to Russia. But I think he's going to find it very difficult. There's a lot of facts, a lot of granularity in this leak report about, particular people in particular places having particular meetings. And some of that can be stood up. I wouldn't be surprised if we get some more details, for example, about this mysterious meeting in Prague. And if that turns out to be true, then it's going to add credibility to a lot of the other things in the report. And that's something that he can't just get away with by saying it's all rubbish and it's all fake news.
Okay, let's see what's happening, should we, at Trump Tower as we're chatting. Sam Cowley, this mysterious meeting in Prague.
Well, it purports to have been between a senior Trump official or a supporter of Trump and the
Who says he's never been to Prague.
But he's already said he hasn't been to Prague. I mean, this document has been knocking around in media circles since, I think, but the earliest, there's a series of documents that stretch from dated the summer of last year right through to the post-result period, so to December last year too. So they stretch over a long period of time. They have been in the hands of the media and allegedly the FBI, and I think this is one of the interesting areas, certainly for the United States to address, as to what, if anything, is happening in terms of the investigation. But so far, no US journalist has been able to stand up in any serious way the allegations. What they are saying is that they come from a source that is a distinguished source, one known to the US intelligence community, a former MI6 officer who was commissioned first by Republicans who are anti-Trump and then taken on by Democrats, and he's been feeding this into the American system, and that this report was then presented as part of the wider series of dossiers on Russia's information war, if you like, against the United States during the election period. But it doesn't, in and of itself, so far, the detail in there has not been able to be stood up by journalists who've been working on it now for many months.
Okay, let's bring in Niall on that one, should we? What's the view on the Hill on that one, Niall?
Yeah, I think that your previous speaker makes a good point. I mean, this is obviously deeply controversial. It set off all sorts of ethical questions in the media here as well as in the political world about just how justifiable it is to publish very specific allegations that cannot be verified. Now, of course, one side of this is the allegations are so serious and also in some cases so salacious that they almost demand coverage. On the other hand, this is the President-elect of the United States being accused of something in a way that no one has been able to substantiate, and we now have all of these allegations in the ether, in the general atmosphere of political discussion. And I can see why some people would see that as problematic.
Doctor?
Well, I'm of a completely different side. Now, as journalists, you have to present the information. This is one that I absolutely do not believe. I mean, I have spent time investigating it, and what shocks me is that everything is equal. Blackmail, salacious, sex, sleaze, production of tapes, and then the documents are not even legitimate documents in terms of the way the intelligence agencies denote them to be top secret or to be confidential documents. And the media hates Trump. They hate him. They would like
I think
to
it's
find
mutual, though, isn't it?
Well, of course, but they would love to find a way to just expose him and not have him be president. They have been working on this for so long and they can't verify it. The fact that they are unable to verify it really puts it in question for me.
Yeah, but that healthy hate-hate relationship of the media and your senior politicians is what you're looking for, really, isn't it? I mean, that's what happens here.
The hate-hate?
Yeah. Absolutely,
You know,
absolutely. We'll stick it to our politicians whenever we can. You're nodding at that, Edward.
Yes, I mean, I think there's a bit of a difference here. I mean, I think that it's quite right to say that there's a serious problem in modern politics about the stealing of documents electronically and then using them leaking them for a political purpose. And we wouldn't accept people breaking in to Hillary Clinton's office and stealing documents from her safe. And then using that to skew the election, but somehow if it's breaking into her emails or her associates' emails and publishing them on some weird leaks website, that's sort of okay because it's interesting. And I think that journalists do have to think about the way in which we deal with stolen information. And then there's a second question about unverified information. But of course, the thing about unverified information is, well, you can try and verify it. And if Mr. Cohen, this Trump associate, did meet with a Russian official in a Russian official building in Prague sometime in August or September, well, that's a fact. And if it turns out he didn't and he can show where he was, then that casts doubt on all the rest of the reports. So that's why I'm saying that this level of granularity, I think, does take us on a bit. And I don't think you can fault journalists for trying to investigate this and just saying, did he stay in this hotel? How much of this can we stand up? And if it turns out that some of this is true, then it's devastating. If it turns out that chunks of it aren't true, then it puts the whole of the rest of this leaked dossier, which I was given this back in September, and I looked at it and thought, well, it would be interesting to try and stand this up. And I didn't get anywhere either, but that doesn't mean it can't be stood up.
Okay. What we can stand up are the tweets that he keeps sending. So let's have a quick look at those, should we? He's 10 minutes late at the moment. We are keeping an eye on what's happening at Trump Tower. Intelligence agencies should never have allowed this fake news to leak, is what he's saying, into the public. One last shot at me. Are we living in Nazi Germany? I win an election easily, a great movement is verified, and crooked opponents, that word again, trying to belittle our victory with fake news. A sorry state. Russia has never tried to use leverage over me. Then he shouts, I have nothing to do with Russia, no deals, no loans, no nothing, goes on. Russia just said the unverified report paid for by political opponent is a complete and total fabrication, utter nonsense, very unfair, a total political witch hunt. It certainly gives you lots of fodder there, Neil, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Donald Trump is famous for using his tweets for these kind of rather outlandish statements. There are a couple of things, though, to be unpacked there. One is his attitude toward the intelligence community. I mean, here in Washington, there has been a sort of undeclared war between the Trump camp and the intelligence community, dating back to the allegations of Russia involvement in the election. Donald Trump has been extremely critical. And in fact, a number of US senators warned him that one faces blowback from the intelligence community if you're publicly disparaging them. So I think that's one element in all of this, and obviously a point that Donald Trump is hitting quite hard, as well as the idea that some of these charges are not just politically motivated, but aimed at delegitimizing his election win. That's again a note that he has sounded on previous occasions, and he clearly sees this as part of that ongoing campaign.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, he said that the elections were rigged until it went his way.
Well, I don't think you can. A plus B doesn't equal C. I mean, things were rigged, and in the primary process, I mean, Bernie Sanders, if they didn't have superdelegates in the Democratic National Committee, he actually could have easily won that nomination. But
that's not rigging, is it? That's just the way they do it.
Well, it's the way they do it. And yes, he uses the word rigging.
Isn't this the key point, which is why there is some credibility being attached to a document that I, for one, as a journalist, if I couldn't verify, would have had nothing to do with publishing. But because Donald Trump chucks out words, he talks about rigged elections when they are absolutely not rigged. You've fallen for it. You're talking about rigged. It's not even your party, and you're quoting Donald Trump as saying it was rigged. It's not rigged. It's a weird process that you find uncomfortable. But it's not rigging, is it? But by using these terms, he's doing two things. He's throwing chaff into the debate so that there is no words have any meaning left anymore. And I think that potentially he is suffering the consequences of that with this document. And just one other point. a little part of me thinks that this may be a very sophisticated disinformation campaign. This may blow up in the faces of what he calls the mainstream media, because they may well have been so bounced into covering something that may turn out to be completely bogus.
Exactly. Well, let me also tell you that I wrote an article before the April RNC, Republican National Committee meeting, because we were worried it was going to be rigged about who was going to get the nomination, and that there were machinations going on in the back. And so I actually outlined all the things that could possibly be going on. So whether it's backroom dealing or it's rigged, you know, it used to operate that way. Every decision was made in the back room years ago, until we started having primaries and delegates. And so there is a cross between, I want everything transparent and don't make any decisions behind my back, but yet I know you're going to probably do it.
Okay, just let me alert our viewers that we've seen Jared Kushner, the son-in-law. He has been walking in within the last few moments. We've also seen Kellyanne Conway, who has been at the right hand of Trump throughout the campaign, and indeed since he has taken off, or will shortly take office, since he won the election, I should say. And also Rudy Giuliani. Interesting, that one, Edward, because a lot of people had thought that Rudy Giuliani would potentially, given his legal background, get quite a key role within the administration.
Indeed, and I think that the whole business of how the administration is being constructed doesn't give you the feeling that a very strong hand is on the tiller, that, you know, who knows what's going on. There seems to be quite a random sort of selection in some cases, so that's a bit of cause for concern. But I also just want to pick up on the fact that Mr. Trump, I think, has not dealt with this very well. He could have said, I won the election fair and square. I abhor any suggestion of Mr. Putin or his Secret Service interfering in this election. It's against everything that America stands for. If they've been doing it, there will certainly be consequences. Certainly they haven't got themselves any benefit.
Stand by, if you would. Just stand by, Edward, because just want to alert people to the fact that we recognise that hair anywhere, and that is the President-elect, who is just standing in the wings there with his father-in-law.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. We are now 9 days
and also with his daughter. Can't see Kellyanne Conway just at the moment. All his children are there, actually. I think, can I see Eric there as well? And Donald Jr., I think I can.
Sherry Dillon, a prominent attorney in Washington, D.C. with the prestigious firm of Morgan Lewis, who structured the agreements pursuant to the president's business arrangement, and she will give brief remarks. Before we start, I want to bring your attention to a few points on the report.
Okay, so there's a bit of housekeeping going on just at the moment. Edward, I interrupted you. You crack on.
Yes, I was just going to say that Mr. Trump could have handled this differently. One of the good points has been made is that it wasn't Mr. Putin that told Hillary Clinton to mishandle her campaign, and she could have done more in those crucial states which went against her. So I think that Mr. Trump has quite a strong case that he could make, but he's not making it, and instead he's, as you just mentioned, going for this kind of war with the intelligence community, which isn't a very good idea, because in America, particularly, incidentally, on the conservative side of politics, people rather like the men and women of the intelligence agencies who work hard, in some cases risk their lives for national security. So that's an odd fight to pick. And I think just rhetorically, it makes him look sort of slightly crazy and rather defensive to be responding with tweets like this. You'd expect, with just days to go before the inauguration, that we'd be seeing a bit of gravitas. And I think it's going to be very interesting at this press conference whether he can adopt a slightly more sort of presidential demeanour, which would reassure people that he's now out of campaign mode and moving into governing mode. But the tone of his tweets don't make me feel that's very likely.
What do you think, Neil Stanage, Associate Editor of the US political website The Hill? Do you think he's going to be more presidential today?
It's possible. I mean, I think Donald Trump, whether it was during the campaign or in this transition period, has had moments where he has tried to portray a more conventional or more presidential appearance and demeanour. One of the difficulties for him is that those efforts tend to be rather short-lived. He is a person who won the presidency by going against all the conventional
Neil, I'm going to come back to you
advice.
in just a second, if I may, because they are talking about what's going on with those Russia allegations just at the moment. Let's listen in.
It's flimsy reporting, and it's frankly shameful and disgraceful. With that, it is my honor to introduce the next Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
We are 9 days away from the inauguration of the 45th President of the United States of America. I am profoundly honored and humbled that I will take the oath of office to serve as Vice President of the United States 9 days from today, but I'm even more honored to stand shoulder to shoulder with a new president who will make America great again. Now, the president-elect's leadership and his energy during the campaign was impressive, but as the chairman of the transition effort, I can assure the American people that his energy and his vision during the course of this transition has been even more inspiring. To see the way he has brought together men and women of extraordinary capability at a historic pace in this cabinet. 19 of the 21 cabinet officials have been announced, 9 committee hearings already scheduled, 7 more soon to go on the books in the next several days. And it is a compilation of men and women with an unprecedented caliber of leadership and background to help this administration move our nation forward. Perhaps that's why there's been such a concerted effort by some in the mainstream media to delegitimize this election and to demean our incoming administration. You know, I have long been a supporter of a free and independent press, and I always will be. But with freedom comes responsibility. And the irresponsible decision of a few news organizations to run with a false and unsubstantiated report when most news organizations resisted the temptation to propagate this fake news can only be attributed to media bias, an attempt to demean the president-elect and our incoming administration, and the American people are sick and tired of it. But today, we'll get back to real news, to real facts, and the real progress our incoming president has already made in reviving the American economy and assembling a team that will make America great again. And we'll hear from the president-elect about issues that are of paramount importance to the American people today. So it is my honor to introduce to all of you my friend and the president-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
Thank you very much. It's very familiar territory, news conferences, because we used to give them on a almost daily basis. I think we probably maybe won the nomination because of news conferences, and it's good to be with you. We stopped giving them because we were getting quite a bit of inaccurate news, but I do have to say that, and I must say that I want to thank a lot of the news organizations here today, because they looked at that nonsense that was released by maybe the intelligence agencies, who knows, but maybe the intelligence agencies, which would be a tremendous blot on their record if they in fact did that, a tremendous blot, because a thing like that should have never been written, it should never have been had, and it should certainly never have been released. But I want to thank a lot of the news organizations, for some of whom have not treated me very well over the years, a couple in particular, and they came out so strongly against that fake news and the fact that it was written about by primarily one group and one television station. So I just want to compliment many of the people in the room. I have great respect for the news and great respect for freedom of the press and all of that, but I will tell you there were some news organizations, with all that was just said, that were so professional, so incredibly professional, that I've just gone up a notch as to what I think of you, okay? All right. We've had some great news over the last couple of weeks. I've been quite active, I guess you could say, in an economic way for the country. A lot of Car companies are going to be moving in. We have other companies. Big news is going to be announced over the next couple of weeks about companies that are going to be building in the Midwest. You saw yesterday Fiat, Chrysler, big factory going to be built in this country as opposed to another country. Ford just announced that they stopped plans for a billion-dollar plant in Mexico, and they're going to be moving into Michigan and expanding very substantially an existing plant. I appreciate that from Ford. I appreciate it very much from Fiat Chrysler. I hope that General Motors will be following, and I think they will be. I think a lot of people will be following. I think a lot of industries are going to be coming back. We have to get our drug industry coming back. Our drug industry has been disastrous. They're leaving left and right. They supply our drugs, but they don't make them here to a large extent. And the other thing we have to do is create new bidding procedures for the drug industry because they're getting away with murder. Pharma has a lot of lobbies, a lot of lobbyists, and a lot of power. And there's very little bidding on drugs. We're the largest buyer of drugs in the world, and yet we don't bid properly. And we're going to start bidding, and we're going to save billions of dollars over a period of time. And we're going to do that with a lot of other industries. I'm very much involved with the generals and admirals on the airplane, the F-35. You've been reading about it. And it's way behind schedule and many billions of dollars over budget. I don't like that. And the admirals have been fantastic. The generals have been fantastic. I've really gotten to know them well. And we're going to do some big things on the F-35 program and perhaps the F-18 program. And we're going to get those costs way down, and we're going to get the plane to be even better, and we're going to have some competition, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. So we've been very much involved, and other things. We had Jack Ma. We had so many incredible people coming here. Mr. Arnault. They're going to do tremendous things in this country. And they're very excited. And I will say, if the election didn't turn out the way it turned out, they would not be here. They would not be in my office. They would not be in anybody else's office. They'd be building and doing things in other countries. So there's a great spirit going on right now, a spirit that many people have told me they've never seen before, ever. We're going to create jobs. I said that I will be the greatest jobs producer that God ever created. And I mean that. I'm going to work very hard on that. We need certain amounts of other things, including a little bit of luck. But I think we're going to do a real job. And I'm very proud of what we've done. And we haven't even gotten there yet. I look very much forward to the inauguration. It's going to be a beautiful event. We have great talent, tremendous talent. And we have all of the bands, or most of the bands, from the different segments of the military. And I've heard some of these bands over the years. They're incredible. We're going to have a very elegant day. The 20th is going to be something that will be very special, very beautiful. And I think we're going to have massive crowds because we have a movement. It's a movement like the world has never seen before. It's a movement that a lot of people didn't expect. And even the polls, although some of them did get it right, but many of them didn't. And that was a beautiful scene on November 8th as those states started to pour in. And we focused very hard on those states, and they really reciprocated. And those states are going to have a lot of jobs, and they're going to have a lot of security. They're going to have a lot of good news for their veterans. And by the way, speaking of veterans, I appointed today the head secretary of the Veterans Administration, David Shulkin. And we'll do a news release in a little while, tell you about David. He's fantastic. He's fantastic. He will do a truly great job. One of the commitments I made is that we're going to straighten out the whole situation for our veterans. Our veterans have been treated horribly. They're waiting in line for 15, 16, 17 days. Cases where they go in and they have a minor early stage form of cancer and they can't see a doctor. By the time they get to the doctor, they're terminal. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So David is going to do a fantastic job. We're going to be talking to a few people also to help David. And we have some of the great hospitals of the world going to align themselves with us on the Veterans Administration. like the Cleveland Clinic, like the Mayo Clinic, a few more that we have, and we're going to set up a group. These are hospitals that have been the top of the line, the absolute top of the line, and they're going to get together with their great doctors. Dr. Toby Cosgrove, as you know, from the Cleveland Clinic, has been very involved. Ike Perlmutter has been very, very involved, one of the great men of business. And we're going to straighten out the VA for our veterans. I've been promising that for a long time, and something I feel very, very strongly. So you'll get the information on David, and I think you'll be very impressed with the job he does. We looked long and hard. We interviewed at least 100 people, some good, some not so good, but we had a lot of talent, and we think this selection will be something that will, with time, straighten it out, and straighten it out for good, because our veterans have been treated very unfairly. Okay, questions? Yes, John? Thank you. Sure.
First of all, did the heads of the intelligence agencies provide you with a two-page summary of these unsubstantiated allegations? And secondly to that, on the broader picture, do you accept their opinion that Vladimir Putin ordered the hack of the DNC and the attempted hack of the RNC? And if you do, how will that color your attempts to build a relationship with a leader who has been accused of committing an act of espionage?
Okay, first of all, these meetings, as you know, are confidential, classified. So I'm not allowed to talk about what went on in a meeting. But we had many witnesses in that meeting, many of them with us. And I will say again, I think it's a disgrace that information would be let out. I saw the information, I read the information outside of that meeting. It's all fake news, it's phony stuff. It didn't happen. And it was gotten by opponents of ours, as you know, because you reported it, and so did many of the other people. It was a group of opponents that got together, sick people, and they put that crap together. So I will tell you that not within the meeting, but outside of the meeting, somebody released it. It should never have been, number one, shouldn't have even entered paper, but it should never have been released. But I read what was released, and I think it's a disgrace. I think it's an absolute disgrace. As far as hacking, I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries and other people. And I can say that, you know, when we lost 22 million names and everything else that was hacked recently, they didn't make a big deal out of that. That was something that was extraordinary. That was probably China. We have much hacking going on. And one of the things we're going to do, we have some of the greatest computer minds anywhere in the world that we've assembled. You saw just a sample of it 2 weeks ago up here, where we had the 6 top people in the world. They were never in the same room together as a group. And we're going to put those minds together, and we're going to form a defense. And I have to say this also. The Democratic National Committee did a very poor job. They could have had hacking defense, which we had. And I will give Reince Priebus credit, because when Reince saw what was happening in the world and with this country, he went out and went to various firms and ordered a very, very strong hacking defense. And they tried to hack the Republican National Committee, and they were unable to break through. We have to do that for our country. It's very important.
And just to the last part of that question, where I said, how could all of this potentially color your attempts to build a better relationship with President Putin?
Well, you know, President Putin and Russia put out a statement today that this fake news was indeed fake news. They said it totally never happened. Now, somebody would say, oh, of course he's going to say that. I respected the fact that he said that. And I'll be honest, I think if he did have something, they would have released it. They would have been glad to release it. I think, frankly, had they broken into the Republican National Committee, I think they would have released it, just like they did about Hillary and all of the horrible things that her people, like Mr. Podesta, said about her. I mean, what he said about her was horrible. If somebody said about me what Podesta said about Hillary, I was the boss, I would have fired him immediately, or that person, because what he said about her was horrible. But remember this, we talk about the hacking, and hacking's bad. and it shouldn't be done. But look at the things that were hacked. Look at what was learned from that hacking. That Hillary Clinton got the questions to the debate and didn't report it? That's a horrible thing. That's a horrible thing. Can you imagine that if Donald Trump got the questions to the debate, it would have been the biggest story in the history of stories. And they would have said, immediately you have to get out of the race. Nobody even talked about it. It's a very terrible thing. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, sir? Thank you, Mr. President-elect. On that intelligence report, the second part of their conclusion was that Vladimir Putin ordered it because he aspired to help you in the election. Do you accept that part of the finding? And will you undo what President Obama did to punish the Russians for this, or will you keep it in place?
If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability, because we have a horrible relationship with Russia. Russia can help us fight ISIS, which, by the way, is #1 tricky. I mean, if you look, this administration created ISIS by leaving at the wrong time. The void was created, ISIS was formed. If Putin likes Donald Trump, guess what, folks? That's called an asset, not a liability. Now, I don't know that I'm going to get along with Vladimir Putin. I hope I do, but there's a good chance I won't. And if I don't, do you honestly believe that Hillary would be tougher on Putin than me? Does anybody in this room really believe that? Give me a break. Okay.
Can you make clear whether during your visits to either Moscow or St. Petersburg you engaged in conduct that you now regret, and that a reasonable observer say that you are potentially vulnerable to blackmail by Russia or by its intelligence agencies?
Let me just tell you what I do. When I leave our country, I'm a very high-profile person, would you say? I am extremely careful. I'm surrounded by bodyguards. I'm surrounded by people. And I always tell them, anywhere, but I always tell them, if I'm leaving this country, be very careful, because in your hotel rooms, and no matter where you go, you're going to probably have cameras. I'm not referring just to Russia, but I would certainly put them in that category. And #1, I hope you're going to be good anyway. But in those rooms, you have cameras in the strangest places. Cameras that are so small with modern technology, you can't see them and you won't know. You better be careful, or you'll be watching yourself on nightly television. I tell this to people all the time. I was in Russia years ago with the Miss Universe contest, which did very well. Moscow, the Moscow area, did very, very well. And I told many people, be careful, because you don't want to see yourself on television. Cameras all over the place. And again, not just Russia, all over. Does anyone really believe that story? I'm also very much of a germaphobe, by the way. Believe me.
One more question, sir.
About how you plan to disentangle yourself from your business. But first, I have to follow up on some of these Russia remarks. Based on your comments here today, do you believe the hacking was justified? Does Russia have any leverage over you, financial or otherwise? And if not, will you release your tax returns to prove it?
So I tweeted out that I have no dealings with Russia. I have no deals in Russia. I have no deals that could happen in Russia because we've stayed away. And I have no loans with Russia. As a real estate developer, I have very, very little debt. I have assets that are, and now people have found out how big the company is. I have very little debt. I have very low debt. But I have no loans with Russia at all. And I thought that was important to put out. I certify that. So I have no deals. I have no loans. And I have no dealings. We could make deals in Russia very easily if we wanted to. I just don't want to because I think that would be a conflict. So I have no loans, no dealings, and no current pending deals. Now, I have to say one other thing. Over the weekend, I was offered $2 billion to do a deal in Dubai with a very, very, very amazing man, a great, great developer from the Middle East, Hussein Damak, a friend of mine, great guy, and was offered $2 billion to do a deal in Dubai, number of deals. And I turned it down. I didn't have to turn it down because, as you know, I have a no conflict situation because I'm president, which is, I didn't know about that until about 3 months ago, but it's a nice thing to have. but I don't want to take advantage of something. I have something that others don't have. Vice President Pence also has it. I don't think he'll need it. I have a feeling he's not going to need it. But I have a no conflict of interest provision as president. It was many, many years old. This is for presidents because they don't want presidents getting, I understand, they don't want presidents getting tangled up in minutiae. They want a president to run the country. So I could actually run my business. I could actually run my business and run government at the same time. I don't like the way that looks, but I would be able to do that if I wanted to. I'd be the only one that would be able to do that. You can't do that in any other capacity. But as a president, I could run the Trump Organization, great, great company, and I could run the company, the country. I do a very good job, but I don't want to do that. Now, all of these papers that you see here, yes, go ahead, Haley. Sure.
Saying about no deals in Russia.
Well, I'm not releasing the tax returns because, as you know, they're under audit.
Since the 70s, has had a required audit from the IRS. The last 6 have released him. But as president, sir, as you're taking office.
The only about my tax returns are the reporters, okay? They're the only ones. But,
public is concerned?
But no, I don't think so. I won.
Do you believe
I
that
became president. No, I don't think they care at all. I don't think they care at all. I think you care. I think you care. First of all, you learn very little from a tax return. What you should do is go down to federal elections and take a look at the numbers. And actually, people have learned a lot about my company, and now they realize my company is much bigger, much more powerful than they ever thought. We're in many, many countries, and I'm very proud of it. And what I'm going to be doing is my 2 sons, who are right here, Don and Eric, are going to be running the company. They are going to be running it in a very professional manner. They're not going to discuss it with me. Again, I don't have to do this. They're not going to discuss it with me. And with that, I'm going to bring up Sherry Dillon, and she's going to go, these papers are just some of the many documents that I've signed, turning over complete and total control to my sons.
Sir, can we ask you one more question on Russia, though, sir?
Good morning. It's my honor and privilege to be here today at President-elect Trump's request. He's asked me, as you just heard, to speak about the conflicts of interest and the steps he's taking. As you know, the business empire built by President-elect Trump over the years is massive, not dissimilar to the fortunes of Nelson Rockefeller when he became vice president. But at that time, no one was so concerned. President-elect Trump wants the American public to rest assured that all of his efforts are directed to pursuing the people's business and not his own. To that end, as he explained a few moments ago, he directed me and my colleagues at the law firm Morgan, Lewis & Bockius to design a structure for his business empire that would completely isolate him from the management of the company. He further instructed that we build in protections that will assure the American people the decisions he makes and the actions that he takes as president are for their benefit and not to support his financial interests. As he said, he's voluntarily taking this on. The conflicts of interest laws simply do not apply to the president or the vice president, and they are not required to separate themselves from their financial assets. The primary conflicts of interest statute, since some have questioned this, is Section 18 U.S.C. 208, and it's simply inapplicable by its terms. And this is not just our interpretation. It's Congress itself who made this clear in 1989 when it amended Section 18 U.S.C. 202 to state that, except as otherwise provided, the terms office and employee in Section 208 shall not include the president. Even so, President-elect Trump wants there to be no doubt in the minds of the American public that he is completely isolating himself from his business interests. He instructed us to take all steps realistically possible to make it clear that he is not exploiting the office of the presidency for his personal benefit. He also sought the guidance of individuals who are familiar with and have worked extensively in the fields of government ethics and constitutional law. Critical to the Morgan Lewis team is Fred Fielding, standing here to our side and with us today. And many of you have known him. He has served several presidents over the years, including serving as counsel to Presidents Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush, as well as serving on President George H.W. Bush's Commission on Federal Ethics Law Reform, and he also held the position of Vice Chair of the Ethics Resource Center. Mr. Fielding has been extensively involved with and approved this plan. He's here today to support the plan, and he will continue to provide guidance as the plan is implemented and as Eric, Don, along with others, take over management of the Trump Organization. I'm going to detail some of the extraordinary steps now that the President-elect is taking. First, President-elect Trump's investments in business assets, commonly known as the Trump Organization, comprising hundreds of entities, which again, if you all go and take a look at his financial disclosure statement, the pages and pages and pages of entities have all been or will be conveyed to a trust prior to January 20th. Here is just some of the paperwork that's taking care of those actions. Second, through the trust agreement, he has relinquished leadership and management of the Trump Organization to his sons, Don and Eric, and a longtime Trump executive, Alan Weisselberg. Together, Don, Eric, and Alan will have the authority to manage the Trump Organization and will make decisions for the duration of the presidency without any involvement whatsoever by President-elect Trump. Further, at the President-elect's direction, the trust agreement provides to ensure the Trump Organization continues to operate in accordance with the highest and legal ethics standards, an ethics advisor will be appointed to the management team. The written approval of the ethics advisor will be required for new deals, actions, and transactions that could potentially raise ethics or conflicts of interest concerns. President-elect Trump, as well as Don, Eric, and Alan, are committed to ensuring that the activities of the Trump Organization are beyond reproach and cannot be perceived to be exploitive of the office of the presidency. President-elect Trump will resign from all officer and other positions he holds with the Trump Organization entities. Further, in addition, his daughter Ivanka will have no further involvement with or management authority whatsoever with the Trump Organization. As she and Jared move their family to D.C., Ivanka will be focused on settling her children into their new homes and their new schools. The President-elect has also already disposed of all of his investments in publicly traded or easily liquidated investments. As a result, the trust will have two types of assets. First, it will hold liquid assets, cash, cash equivalents, and treasuries, and perhaps some positions in a government-approved diversified portfolio, one that is consistent with the regulations from the Office of Government Ethics. Second, the trust is going to hold his pre-existing, illiquid, but very valuable business assets, the ones that everyone here is familiar with. Trump-owned, operated, and branded golf clubs, commercial rental property, resorts, hotels, rights to royalties from pre-existing licenses of Trump marks, productions, and goods. So things like Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, all of his other business assets, 40 Wall Street, will all be in the trust. Through instructions in the trust agreement, President-elect Trump first ordered that all pending deals be terminated. This impacted more than 30 deals, many of which were set to close by the end of 2016. As you can well imagine, that caused an immediate financial loss of millions of dollars, not just for President-elect Trump, but also for Don, Ivanka, and Eric. The trust agreement, as directed by President Trump, imposes severe restrictions on new deals. No new foreign deals will be made whatsoever during the duration of President Trump's presidency. New domestic deals will be allowed, but they will go through a vigorous vetting process. The President-elect will have no role in deciding whether the Trump Organization engages in any new deal, and he will only know of a deal if he reads it in the paper or sees it on TV. Because any new deal could, and I emphasize could, be perceived as causing a conflict or as exploiting the office of the presidency, new deals must be vetted with the ethics advisor, whose role will be to analyze any potential transactions for conflicts and ethics issues. The ethics advisor will be a recognized expert in the field of government experts. Again, his role will be to scrutinize the new deals and the actions, and any new deal must receive written approval. To further reinforce the wall that we are building between President-elect Trump and the Trump Organization, President-elect Trump has ordered through his trust agreement to sharply limit his information rights. Reports will only be available and reflect profit and loss on the company as a whole. There will be no separate business-by-business accounting. Another step that President-elect Trump has taken is he created a new position at the Trump Organization, the position of Chief Compliance Counsel, whose responsibility will be to ensure that the Trump businesses, again, are operating at the highest levels of integrity and not taking any actions that could be perceived as exploiting the office of the presidency. He has also directed that no communications of the Trump Organization, including social media accounts, will reference or be tied to President-elect Trump's role as President of the United States or the office of the presidency. In sum, all of these actions, complete relinquishment of management, no foreign deals, ethics advisor approval of deals, sharply limited information rights, will sever President-elect Trump's presidency from the Trump Organization. Some have asked questions. Why not divest? Why not just sell everything? Form a blind trust? And I'd like to turn to addressing some of those questions now. Selling, first and foremost, would not eliminate possibilities of conflicts of interest. In fact, it would exacerbate them. The Trump brand is key to the value of the Trump Organization's assets. If President-elect Trump sold his brand, he would be entitled to royalties for the use of it, and this would result in the trust retaining an interest in the brand without the ability to assure that it does not exploit the office of the presidency. Further, whatever price was paid would be subject to criticism and scrutiny. Was it too high? Is there pay for play? Was it too much paid to curry favor with the president-elect? And selling his assets without the rights to the brand would greatly diminish the value of the assets and create a fire sale. President-elect Trump should not be expected to destroy the company he built. This plan offers a suitable alternative to address the concerns of the American people. And selling the entire Trump Organization isn't even feasible. Some people have suggested that the president-elect sell the business to his adult children. This would require massive third-party debt sourced with multiple lenders whose motives and willingness to participate would be questioned and undoubtedly investigated. And if the president-elect were to finance the sale himself, he would retain the financial interests in the assets that he owns now. Some people have suggested that President-elect Trump could bundle the assets and turn the Trump Organization into a public company. Anyone who's ever gone through this extraordinarily cumbersome and complicated process knows that it is a non-starter. It is not realistic, and it would be inappropriate for the Trump Organization. Some people have suggested a blind trust, but you cannot have a totally blind trust with operating businesses. President Trump can't unknow he owns Trump Tower, and the press will make sure that any new developments at the Trump Organization are well publicized. Further, it would be impossible to find an institutional trustee that would be competent to run the Trump Organization. The approach he is taking allows Don and Eric to preserve this great company and its iconic assets. And this approach is best from a conflicts and ethics perspective. It creates a complete separation from President-elect Trump and separates him and prevents him from participating in the business, imposes strict limits on what the trustees can do, and requires the assent of any ethics advisor to a new deal. I'm going to turn to one last topic today that has been of interest lately, called emoluments. That's a word I think we've all become familiar with and perhaps had not heard before. And we're going to describe some other actions the President-elect Trump is taking to avoid even the appearance of a conflict. Emoluments comes from the Constitution. The Constitution says officials may not accept gifts, titles of nobility, or emoluments from foreign governments with respect to their office, and that no benefit should be derived by holding an office. The so-called emoluments clause has never been interpreted, however, to apply to fair value exchanges that have absolutely nothing to do with an office holder. No one would have thought when the Constitution was written that paying your hotel bill was an emolument. Instead, it would have been thought of as a value for value exchange, not a gift, not a title, and not an emolument. But since President-elect Trump has been elected, some people want to define emoluments to cover routine business transactions, like paying for hotel rooms. They suggest that the Constitution prohibits the businesses from even arm's-length transactions that the President-elect has absolutely nothing to do with and isn't even aware of. These people are wrong. This is not what the Constitution says. Paying for a hotel room is not a gift or a present, and it has nothing to do with an office. It's not an emolument. The Constitution does not require President-elect Trump to do anything here. But just like with conflicts of interest, he wants to do more than what the Constitution requires. So President-elect Trump has decided, and we are announcing today, that he is going to voluntarily donate all profits from foreign government payments made to his hotels to the United States Treasury. This way, it is the American people who will profit. In sum, I and President-elect's other advisors at Morgan Lewis have determined the approach we've outlined today will avoid potential conflicts of interest or concerns regarding exploitation of the office of the presidency without imposing unnecessary and unreasonable losses on the President-elect and his family. We believe this structure and these steps will serve to accomplish the President-elect's desire to be isolated from his business interests and give the American people confidence that his sole business and interest is in making America great again, bringing back jobs to this country, securing our borders, and rebuilding our infrastructure. The American people were well aware of President-elect Trump's business empire and financial interests when they voted. Many people voted for him precisely because of his business success. President-elect Trump wants to bring this success to all Americans. Thank you. You're welcome. My pleasure. Good. Oops. Don't want to lose your notes.
Thank you very much. Here you go.
Thank you.
Sir Trump, thank you, Mr. Trump. Trey Yanks with One American News. What is your response to your critics that say not only you, but also your cabinet is filled with conflicts of interest? And do you plan to set an example in the future to make sure that your cabinet and everyone throughout your administration?
Good question. I really think that when you watch what's going on with what's happening in Washington, I was just watching, as an example, Rex Tillerson. I think it's brilliant what he's doing and what he's saying. I watched yesterday, as you know, our great senator who is going to be a great attorney general, and he was brilliant. And what people don't know is that he was a great prosecutor and attorney general in Alabama, and he was brilliant yesterday. So I really think that I think we have one of the great cabinets ever put together. And we've been hearing that from so many people. People are so happy. You know, in the case of Rex, he ran incredibly ExxonMobil. When there was a find, he would get it. When they needed something, he would be there. A friend of mine who's very, very substantial in the oil business, Harold Hamm, big supporter, he said, there's nobody in the business like Rex Tillerson. And that's what we want. That's what I want to bring to government. I want to bring the greatest people into government because we're way behind. We don't make good deals anymore. I say it all the time at speeches. We don't make good deals anymore. We make bad deals. Our trade deals are a disaster. We have hundreds of billions of dollars of losses on a yearly basis, hundreds of billions with China on trade and trade imbalance, with Japan, with Mexico, with just about everybody. We don't make good deals anymore. So we need people that are smart. We need people that are successful. And they got successful because, generally speaking, they're smart. And that's what I put. I'm very proud of the cabinet. I think they're doing very well. It's very interesting how it's going, but I think they're doing very, very well.
Mr. Trump, a quick follow-up, sir, on Russia, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President-elect. I wanted to ask a few questions on Obamacare. Can you be specific on what guidance you're giving congressional Republicans on the timeline for repeal and replace, whether it needs to be simultaneous or a delay?
Obamacare, I thought it was never going to be asked.
I also wanted to ask you, though, if you have outlined a plan for what you want the replace package to look like. Would it guarantee coverage for those who have gotten health insurance through the current Obamacare law?
You're going to be very, very proud, as not only the media and reporters, you're going to be very proud of what we put forth having to do with health care. Obamacare is a complete and total disaster. They can say what they want. They can guide you any way they want to guide you. In some cases, they guide you incorrectly. In most cases, you realize what's happened. It's imploding as we sit. Some states have over 100% increase. And 17, and I said this 2 years ago, 17 is going to be the bad year. It's going to be catastrophic. Frankly, we could sit back, and it was a thought from a political standpoint, but it wouldn't be fair to the people. We could sit back and wait and watch and criticize. And we could be a Chuck Schumer and sit back and criticize it, and people would come, they would come, begging to us, please, we have to do something about Obamacare. We don't want to own it. We don't want to own it politically. They own it right now. So the easiest thing would be to let it implode in 17, and believe me, we'd get pretty much whatever we wanted, but it would take a long time. We're going to be submitting, as soon as our secretary is approved, almost simultaneously, shortly thereafter, a plan. It'll be repeal and replace. It will be essentially simultaneously. It will be various segments, you understand, but will most likely be on the same day or the same week, but probably the same day, could be the same hour. So we're going to do repeal and replace, very complicated stuff. And we're going to get a health bill passed. We're going to get health care taken care of in this country. You have deductibles that are so high that after people go broke paying their premiums, which are going through the roof, the health care can't even be used by them because the deductibles are so high. Obamacare is the Democrats' problem. We are going to take the problem off the shelves for them. We're doing them a tremendous service by doing it. We could sit back and let them hang with it. We are doing the Democrats a great service. So as soon as our secretary is approved and gets into the office, we'll be filing a plan. And it was actually pretty accurately reported today, the New York Times. And the plan will be repeal and replace Obamacare. We're going to have a health care that is far less expensive and far better. Okay.
Can we just ask you, sir,
President-elect Trump.
Mr. President, which one, Mr. President?
Thank you. President-elect Trump, John Steinberg from Cheddar. When you look at all the meetings that you've had with Carrier and SoftBank and Alibaba, do you conceive of making this a program, maybe sitting inside of Commerce? And then my follow-up question to that is, how soon will we see the program on capital repatriation and corporate tax cuts?
Well, if I can save jobs, for instance, I was doing individual companies, and people said, well, but that's only one company. Like we did a good job with Carrier. And I want to thank United Technologies, which owns Carrier. But we saved close to 1,000 jobs. And they were gone. And Mike Pence and his staff really helped us a lot. But those were that was a tough one because they announced a year and a half before that they were leaving. So it's always tough. When they're building a plant, it's a little tougher than before they start or before they make an announcement. So I want to thank United Technologies. I've been meeting with a lot of companies. But what really is happening is the word is now out that when you want to move your plant to Mexico or some other place, and you want to fire all of your workers from Michigan and Ohio and all these places that I won for good reason, it's not going to happen that way anymore. You want to move your plant, and you think, as an example, you're going to build that plant in Mexico, and you're going to make your air conditioners or your cars or whatever you're making, and you're going to sell it through what will be a very, very strong border. Not a weak border like it is now. We don't even have a border. It's an open sieve. But you're going to sell through a very strong border. Not going to happen. You're going to pay a very large border tax. So if you want to move to another country, and if you want to fire all of our great American workers that got you there in the first place, you can move from Michigan to Tennessee and to North Carolina and South Carolina. You can move from South Carolina back to Michigan. You can do anywhere. You got a lot of states at play, a lot of competition. So it's not like, oh, gee, I'm taking the competition. We got a lot of places you can move. And I don't care, as long as it's within the United States, the borders of the United States. There will be a major border tax on these companies that are leaving and getting away with murder. And if our politicians had what it takes, they would have done this years ago, and you'd have millions more workers right now in the United States that are 96 million really wanting a job and they can't get. You know that story, the real number. That's the real number. So that's the way it is. Okay, go ahead.
President-elect, I have a question about the Supreme Court and the border security, but I also want you to ask you about something you said on Twitter this morning. Are we living in Nazi Germany? What were you driving at there? Do you have a problem with the intelligence community? And on the Supreme Court, what's your timeline? You said a while ago you were down to 4. Have you conducted those interviews yet? What's your timeline for nominating? And on the border fence, it now appears clear U.S. taxpayers will have to pay for it up front. What is your plan to get Mexico to pay for it?
You have any more? On the fence. It's not a fence, it's a wall. You just misreported it. We're going to build a wall. I could wait about a year and a half until we finish our negotiations with Mexico, which will start immediately after we get to office, but I don't want to wait. Mike Pence is leading an effort to get final approvals through various agencies and through Congress for the wall to begin. I don't feel like waiting a year or a year and a half. We're going to start building. Mexico, in some form, and there are many different forms, will reimburse us, and they will reimburse us for the cost of the wall. That will happen, whether it's a tax or whether it's a payment, probably less likely that it's a payment, but it will happen. So remember this, okay? I would say we are going to build a wall, and people would go crazy. I would then say, who's going to pay for the wall? And people would all scream out, 25, 30,000 people, because nobody's ever had crowds like Trump has had. You know that. You don't like to report that, but that's okay. Okay, now he agrees. Finally, he agrees. But I say, who's going to pay for the wall? And they will scream out, Mexico. Now, reports went out last week, oh, Mexico's not going to pay for the wall because of a reimbursement. What's the difference? I want to get the wall started. I don't want to wait a year and a half until I make my deal with Mexico. So, and we probably will have a deal sooner than that. And by the way, Mexico has been so nice, so nice. I respect the government of Mexico. I respect the people of Mexico. I love the people of Mexico. I have many people from Mexico working for me. They're phenomenal people. The government of Mexico is terrific. I don't blame them for what's happened. I don't blame them for taking advantage of the United States. I wish our politicians were so smart. Mexico has taken advantage of the United States. I don't blame the representatives and various presidents, etc., of Mexico. What I say is we shouldn't have allowed that to happen. It's not going to happen anymore. So in order to get the wall started, Mexico will pay for the wall, but it'll be reimbursed. Okay? Supreme Court judge. So, as you know, I have a list of 20. I've gone through them. We've met with numerous candidates. They're outstanding in every case. They were largely recommended and highly recommended by Federalist Society. Jim DeMint was also very much involved in his group, which is fantastic, and he's a fantastic guy. So between Leo and Jim DeMint and some senators and some Congress people, we have a great group of people. I'll be making the decision on who we will put up for Justice of the United States Supreme Court, a replacement for the great, great Justice Scalia. That will be probably within 2 weeks of the 20th. So within about 2 weeks, probably the second week. I consider the first day because we'll also be doing some pretty good signings. And I think what we'll do is we'll wait till Monday. That will be our really first business day, as opposed to doing it on Friday, because on Friday people are going to have a very good time at the inauguration. And then Saturday, as you know, we're having a big church service and lots of good things are happening. So our first day, and you'll all be invited to the signings, but we'll be doing some pretty good signings on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, and then also the next week. And you're all invited. But on the Supreme Court, I'll be making that decision, and it'll be a decision which I very strongly believe in. I think it's one of the reasons I got elected. I think the people of this country did not want to see what was happening with the Supreme Court. So I think it was a very, very big decision as to why I was elected.
Mr. President-elect, the tweet that you had this morning about are we living in Nazi Germany, what were you driving at there? What are you trying to tell the
I think it
public?
was disgraceful that the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake out. I think it's a disgrace. And I say that, and that's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do. I think it's a disgrace. That information that was false and fake and never happened got released to the public. As far as BuzzFeed, which is a failing pile of garbage, writing it, I think they're going to suffer the consequences. They already are. And as far as CNN going out of their way to build it up, and by the way, we just found out I was coming down. Michael Cohen, Michael Cohen is a very talented lawyer. He's a good lawyer in my firm. It was just reported that it wasn't this Michael Cohen they were talking about. So all night long, it's Michael Cohen. I said, I want to see your passport. He brings his passport to my office. I say, hey, wait a minute. He didn't leave the country. He wasn't out of the country. They had Michael Cohen of the Trump Organization was in Prague. It turned out to be a different Michael Cohen. It's a disgrace what took place. It's a disgrace. And I think they ought to apologize to start with Michael Cohen.
Sir, since you're attacking us, can you give us a question?
Go ahead.
No, Mr. President-elect.
Go ahead.
Mr. President-elect, since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization.
You are attacking our news organization. Can you give us a chance to ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can you state, Mr. President-elect, can you state categorically, Mr. President-elect, can you give us a question? You're attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you give us a question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
Go ahead.
can you state categorically that nobody... No, Mr. President-elect, that's not appropriate.
President Obama went too far with the sanctions he put on Russia after the hacking? Do you think they're
I don't say he
disproportionate?
went too far.
And what
No.
will you roll them back?
No.
And what do you think of Lindsey
I don't
Graham's
say-
plan to send you a bill for tougher ones?
Plans to send me a bill for what?
For tougher sanctions.
I
Lindsey Graham.
hadn't heard Lindsey Graham was going to do that. Lindsey Graham. I've been competing with him for a long time. He's going to crack that 1% barrier one day. I didn't realize Lindsey Graham's still at it. It's all right. I think Lindsey Graham's a nice guy, actually. I've heard that he's a nice guy, and I've been hearing it. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. You've been waiting. Go ahead.
As far as we understand, the intelligence community are...
Stand up, please.
Yeah, Ian Pannell from BBC News. Ian Pannell from BBC News.
BBC
News, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. As far as we understand it, the intelligence community are still looking at these allegations. It's false news, as you describe it. If they come back with any kind of conclusion that any of it stands up, that any of it is true, will you consider your position? Would you think
There's
about
nothing they
resigning?
can come back with.
Over here!
Can you
ahead.
this decision to publish fake news and all the problems that we've seen throughout the media over the course of the election? What reforms do you recommend for this industry here?
Well, I don't recommend reforms. I recommend people that are that have some moral compass. I've been hearing more and more about a thing called fake news, and they're talking about people that go and say all sorts of things. But I will tell you, some of the media outlets that I deal with are fake news, more so than anybody. I could name them, but I won't bother. But you have few sitting right in front of us. So they're very, very dishonest people. But I think it's just something we're going to have to live with. I guess the advantage I have is that I can speak back. When it happens to somebody that doesn't have that kind of a megaphone, they can't speak back. It's a very sad thing. I've seen people destroyed. I've seen people absolutely destroyed, and I think it's very unfair. So all I can ask for is honest reporters, yes.
I just want to follow up on the questions about the U.S. intelligence community and be very clear about what you're saying. Do you trust your U.S. intelligence officials? And what do you say to foreign policy experts who say you're actually weakening national security by waging this war of words against that community?
Intelligence agencies are vital and very, very important. We are going to be putting in, as you know, Mr. Pompeo and others, you know the Senator, Dan Coates. We're going to be putting in some outstanding people. Within 90 days, they're going to be coming back to me with a major report on hacking. I want them to cover this situation, I also want them, however, to cover, maybe most importantly, because we're hacked by everybody. You know, the United States, our government, out of a list of 17 in terms of industries, is the worst. It's number 17 in terms of protection. If you look at the retail industry, if you look at the banking industry, various industries, out of 17 industries, they put this in the category of an industry, the United States is last in terms of protecting, let's say, hacking defense. Like we had a great hacking defense at the Republican National Committee. That's why we weren't hacked. By the way, we were told they were trying to hack us, but they weren't able to hack. And I think I get some credit because I told Reince, and Reince did a phenomenal job, but I said, I want strong hacking defense. The Democratic National Committee didn't do that. Maybe that's why the country runs so badly that way. But I will tell you, wait, let me finish. Within 90 days, we will be coming up with a major report on hacking defense. How do we stop this new phenomena, fairly new phenomena? Because the United States is hacked by everybody. That includes Russia and China and everybody. Everybody. Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. President-elect, you said just now that you believe that Russia indeed was responsible for the hacking of the DNC and John Podesta's emails, etc.
Well, Russia, but you know what? Could have been others also.
But why did you spend weeks undermining the U.S. intelligence community before simply getting the facts and then making a public statement?
Well, I think it's pretty sad when intelligence reports get leaked out to the press. I think it's pretty sad. First of all, it's illegal. You know, these are classified and certified meetings and reports. And I'll tell you what does happen. I have many meetings with intelligence, and every time I meet, people are reading about it. Somebody's leaking it out. So then I said, maybe it's my office. Maybe my office, because I have a lot of people, a lot of great people. Maybe it's them. And what I did is I said, I won't tell anybody. I'm going to have a meeting, and I won't tell anybody about my meeting with intelligence. And what happened is I had my meeting. Nobody knew, not even Rona, my executive assistant for years. She didn't know. I didn't tell her. Nobody knew. The meeting was had. The meeting was over. They left. And immediately, the word got out that I had a meeting. So I don't want that. I don't want that. It's very unfair to the country. It's very unfair to our country what's happened. That report should have never, first of all, it shouldn't have been printed because it's not worth the paper it's written on. And I thank the New York Times for saying that. I thank a lot of different people for saying that. But I will tell you, that should never, ever happen. Okay.
President-elect, ABC News. Thank you, Mr. President-elect. Can you stand here today, once and for all, and say that no one connected to you or your campaign had any contact with Russia leading up to or during the presidential campaign? And if you indeed do believe that Russia was behind the hacking, what is your message to Vladimir Putin right now?
He shouldn't be doing it. He won't be doing it. Russia will have much greater respect for our country when I'm leading it than when other people have led it. You will see that. Russia will respect our country more. He shouldn't have done it. I don't believe he'll be doing it more. Now, we have to work something out, but it's not just Russia. Take a look at what's happened. You don't report it the same way. 22 million accounts were hacked in this country by China. And that's because we have no defense. That's because we're run by people that don't know what they're doing. Russia will have far greater respect for our country when I'm leading it. And I believe, and I hope, maybe it won't happen, it's possible, but I won't be given a little reset button like Hillary. Here, press this piece of plastic. Guy looked at her like, what is she doing? There's no reset button. We're either going to get along or we're not. I hope we get along, but if we don't, that's possible too. But Russia and other countries, including China, which has taken total advantage of us economically, totally advantage of us in the South China Sea by building their massive fortress, total. Russia, China, Japan, Mexico, all countries will respect us far more than they do under past administrations.
To my first question.
I want to thank everybody. So this is all, just so you understand, these papers, because I'm not sure that was explained properly, but These papers are all just a piece of the many, many companies that are being put into trust to be run by my two sons. And I hope at the end of 8 years, I'll come back and I'll say, oh, you did a good job. Otherwise, if they do a bad job, I'll say, you're fired. Goodbye, everyone.
You did not answer, sir, you did not answer whether any of your associates were in contact with the Russians. Sir, you did not answer whether any of your associates were in contact with the Russians. Can you categorically deny that did not happen, sir? Can you categorically deny that did not happen, sir?
Sanctions on Russia. Listening, see what else happens.
Sean, he was attacking our news organization.
Was gone. Very keen to make the point, amongst other things, that he would no longer have any involvement with his own business, but it got very feisty with journalists. And, okay, I thought we were going to go to Jim Acosta, so let's go to the panel first. Should somebody tell me what's going on? Fine. Let's bring in Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes, Sam Kiley, Niall Stanage, and Edward Lucas. Hello to you all again. How did you take it, Sam?
Well, I think there were some startling moments there, frankly. I think one of the most interesting statements that the president-elect made was saying that if the Russian President Vladimir Putin had indeed hacked the US election, these are my paraphrasing, but it had hacked the US election, in order to get closer to Trump, this was an asset, not a liability, a phrase he repeated twice. Now, in normal political times, that would be the moment of complete self-immolation. That would be it. If a British Prime Minister said, well, the KGB sees me as a spy, that's all good, they'd be out immediately. He seems to have sailed clean through this whole allegation, I think partly because it's the whole problem over the Russian hacking of the US elections has been muddied in the last 24 hours by the release of this additional report whose provenance is extremely vague, to say the least. And I think that's given him the opportunity to swipe away at this. But this is not going to reassure Republicans on Capitol Hill, many of whom are deeply concerned about...
They're hawks.
The Hawks are deeply, deeply concerned. Yeah. John McCain among them, a man of great distinction who is, in no uncertain terms, very clear about what he thinks Vladimir Putin's game is.
Right, exactly. Except for he's not in sync with the public. He and Lindsey Graham would love it if we went to war with Russia, if we really went after Russia. And the fact is that the public is so tired. Obama was the only president that every single day in office there was a war going on. And we're tired of hearing it. And so we would just rather not. I also think that there is too much being made out of his not criticizing Putin.
Okay, that's a good point to bring in Edward Lucas, actually. I'm sure they would have been watching in the Kremlin, Edward. What do you think they would have made of it?
Golly, well, what a lot of political theatre for a start. And I think that I think you're absolutely right. Sam's absolutely right that some of this would be devastating to a normal politician in normal times. But I think what comes out of this is he's said that he's going to try and improve relations with Russia, but if it doesn't work out, he's going to be tougher than Obama was and tougher than Hillary would have been. And I think that's open to question, but it's a defensible position. And I think although his critics are going to say, oh my goodness, all this is very shocking, a lot of his fans are going to say that was a pretty good press conference. I am dismayed by what Dr. Harper-Hayes just said, that America no longer wants to be a global leader, if that's what she was saying, that Americans are tired of leadership, because the history shows that when America retreats and looks inwards, terrible things happen, and then you have to come in afterwards and sort things out. We've seen that twice in the last century. So I very much hope that NATO allies can still count on the United States under a Trump presidency, particularly if they're menaced by Mr. Putin.
Okay.
But I think that
I just wanted to bring in Niall, if I can, before we go to our first break this hour. Niall, your thoughts? Interesting to hear what you think about the fact that he shouted down at one of our TV colleagues and wouldn't let him ask a question.
Well, this is clearly part of his general assault on the media. He is very critical of the media coverage of this case, as he has been more generally. I do think that there is a method in that approach, in that the media, frankly, are not particularly popular in this country. They are particularly unpopular with Mr. Trump's supporters. So if he can divert, excuse me, this issue about Russia and hacking and salacious allegations into the framework where the media are unfairly attacking him, then I think that both muddies the waters and it possibly helps him politically as well.
Okay, we're going to leave it there for just a second, all of you. Thank you very much indeed. More analysis on what we've heard from Mr. Trump, the president-elect, very shortly indeed, here on Sky News. Do stay tuned. Hello again, you're watching Sky News. Now, he addressed the fact, we're talking about Mr. Trump, of course, that he compared America to Nazi Germany, part of a huge news conference that he's had for the last hour or so. He was talking about that in a tweet, and then he turned on Jim Acosta from CNN. This is what happened next.
I think it was disgraceful that the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake out. I think it's a disgrace. And I say that, and that's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do. I think it's a disgrace. That information that was false and fake and never happened got released to the public. As far as BuzzFeed, which is a failing pile of garbage, writing it, I think they're going to suffer the consequences. They already are. And as far as CNN going out of their way to build it up, and by the way, we just found out I was coming down. Michael Cohen, Michael Cohen is a very talented lawyer. He's a good lawyer in my firm. It was just reported that it wasn't this Michael Cohen they were talking about. So all night long, it's Michael Cohen. I said, I want to see your passport. He brings his passport to my office. I say, hey, wait a minute, he didn't leave the country. He wasn't out of the country. They had Michael Cohen of the Trump Organization was in Prague. It turned out to be a different Michael Cohen. It's a disgrace what took place. It's a disgrace. And I think they ought to apologize to start with Michael Cohen.
Sir, since you're attacking us, can you give us a question?
Go ahead.
No, Mr. President-elect.
Go ahead.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization
You are
is
attacking
terrible.
our news organization.
Your organization
Can you give us a
is
chance
terrible.
to ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can
Quiet.
you state,
Quiet.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
can you state
She's asking a question. Don't
Mr.
be rude.
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be
You're
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you
No, I'm
give
not
us a
going to give you a
question?
question. I'm not going to give you a
Can
question.
you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state?
Okay, well, our US correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter is in New York, where that news conference took place. Got a bit fiery, didn't it? It was pretty tame to start with, and then he became Donald Trump, the Twitter campaigner that we see so much about.
He did. It got pretty rowdy, an indication of how angry he feels about what he's called fake news, the release and publication in full of this dossier that contains some really damaging and embarrassing, utterly unverified allegations. Donald Trump himself, though, isn't shy of making outlandish or extraordinary claims. This press conference was absolutely no exception. At one point, he appeared to suggest that the US intelligence agencies and officials were behind leaking that document in order to damage him. Take a listen to this.
They looked at that nonsense that was released by maybe the intelligence agencies. Who knows? But maybe the intelligence agencies, which would be a tremendous blot on their record if they in fact did that. A tremendous blot. Because a thing like that should have never been written. It should never have been had, and it should certainly never have been released.
He'll be doing a lot
Well, there's so many newsworthy moments in that press conference, it's hard to cover them all in one live report, but it is worth saying that Trump was utterly unrepentant about his admiration as such for Vladimir Putin, Russia's president. He said, if Putin likes Trump, I view that as not a liability, but an asset. The press conference itself was supposed to be specifically about how Donald Trump intends to separate himself as a businessman from his time in the presidency, and he gave lots of detail about that. But he basically said, I'm not going to divest from my business. My children, my sons are going to run all of that. You're just going to have to trust me that they aren't going to discuss any of those details with me.
Okay, for now, Hannah, thanks very much indeed. Again, you're watching Sky News. We want to talk to you in more detail about what's been happening with Donald Trump, the president-elect. He has been holding a news conference at Trump Tower earlier on today. It got a bit feisty at times. He talked about a whole range of issues, including his business and the fact that his sons would be solely in control of it. He is distancing himself from that. He also talked about his relationship with President Putin and Russia more generally. And he also had some views on the intelligence service within the United States and whether or not they actually released fake news to try to discredit him. Let's bring in the former ambassador, Sir Christopher Mayer, former British ambassador to the United States. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. What did you make of him, first of all?
Well, I thought it was quite a subdued performance, given that he was on the back foot and some of the allegations against him are fantastically lurid, so lurid we can't even broadcast them. I thought on the whole he was fairly calm by his standards, and he actually handled a lot of this questioning pretty well. So on the Richter scale of Trump public pronouncements, I thought this rated relatively low.
Let's drill down into the detail then, should we? Let's talk about his business interests to start with. He says he doesn't need to distance himself from his business, but I suppose, you know, by the letter of the law, by the letter of the Constitution in the United States, he doesn't. But nevertheless, no other president has ever found himself in that position and not.
Well, I mean, it may be true that the legalities say that he doesn't have a conflict of interest, but this has never been a legal issue. This has always been a political and ethical issue, and I think he is quite right to go to some length to display in public that he's putting distance or firewall, whatever you like to call it, between himself and his business affairs. And that is why I think he produced the lady lawyer to come out and give us in rather tedious detail all the arrangements that he is making to ensure that he is, as they used to say in the old days, purer than Caesar's wife.
Talk to us about the intelligence agencies that he has been criticising and suggesting, I was going to say inferring, but he suggested that potentially they were the ones that were behind the fake news, in his opinion, that has come out overnight, and those lurid suggestions about what might have happened in
that was one of the
Russian hotel rooms.
That was one of the interesting bits of his statement, because one might have thought before this press conference that he had declared a truce with the intelligence agencies and things were calming down a bit. But that is clearly not the case, because, as you say, he did suggest that they were responsible for the leaking of the story which has appeared in BuzzFeed. So the war goes on between him and the intelligence agencies, and that is not a healthy state of affairs even before he is inaugurated president.
What sort of challenges might that pose for both sides?
Well, I think it is essential for American national security, domestic security, its security overseas, that an administration works hand in glove with the intelligence agencies. They need each other. The intelligence agencies need the politicians and the president, and vice versa. If they are going to start in a state of tension, this doesn't bode well for the coherence of American national security.
Cybersecurity, he talked about that as well. He says it's a basket case. And if Putin was in any way responsible for what might have happened during the election campaign, then he will be held to account.
There is if you do a kind of Kremlinological analysis of what he said about Putin, you might say that there's been a slight change in position. He now allows for the fact that Putin might be guilty of hacking, and he also made, for me, an old Kremlinologist, a very interesting almost aside in which he said, maybe we won't get on, Putin and I, and we probably won't, I think was the phrase he used. So he was, I think today, vis-à-vis Russia, and Putin personally, more pragmatic than he has been in the past,
Okay, so
which is a good thing, I happen to say.
Yeah, I wonder how, I'm sure they were watching in the Kremlin, I wonder how they would have received what he had to say.
God only knows. I mean, we know that Putin has expressed himself favorably towards Trump in public. I very much doubt that Putin is now going to go into public reverse because of these slight nuances of interpretation of what Trump had to say today. So I think for both Trump and Putin, it's going to be a case of, well, you know, suck it and see. Let's see how they get on. Will there be convergence of interest? Will there be divergence? Who knows? We don't know. All crystal balls are pitch black on this.
Talking about crystal balls, how do you see the relationship between the press and the president in the United States? It seems a very different relationship in the US to what it is between politicians and journalists here in the United Kingdom. You've been on both sides of the pond. What's your interpretation?
Well, normally I have found that the press in Washington, those who cover the presidency, those who cover the White House, tend, even today, to show a deference which you will not find in the attitudes of political reporters in London vis-à-vis the Downing Street and the Prime Minister or any cabinet minister. There is still a degree of deference, even reverence towards the office of the President of the United States that can make American reporters pull their punches in Washington, D.C. Also, there is the question of access to the President and presidential sources. And this seems to play a much larger role in Washington than it does in London, where Downing Street is concerned. In other words, American journalists sometimes will pull their punches so as not to prejudice their access to White House sources. And I think what we saw today, which is a slightly different point, is that Trump was trying to mend fences with some of the press by praising them for not running the BuzzFeed story about all the Russian allegations against Trump. But he certainly gave those who ran the story a thorough kicking, as did his press man at the outset of the press conference, as indeed did the vice president as well. I think this shows that Trump takes these allegations seriously, whether they are true or not. And he was right to do so, because it dominated, the issue dominated questions once he handed the thing over to reporters.
Divide and rule, perhaps. Final thought.
Yeah, divide and rule, yes.
Yeah. Final thought. Given how often he's a prolific tweeter, we know he embraces social media in all forms. He has many, many millions of followers. Does he need the 21st century press anymore?
I would say from the day he steps into the Oval Office, he doesn't need them, and he shouldn't do it anyway. It's a risky way of making policy. Now, if you're in a primary campaign or in the presidential campaign, you can get away with using Twitter because it becomes an arm of your campaign. But at some point, you've got to stop campaigning and you've got to start governing. And when you start governing, you can't govern by Twitter. So I would hope, for his sake, for America's sake, and maybe even for the world's sake, that this habit of tweeting in the wee small hours of the night is dropped, because it's dangerous, and it could almost, it may sound like exaggeration at some stage, be a threat to world peace. So Twitter, I think he needs to drop as soon as he gets into the Oval Office.
Okay, good to talk to you as always, Sir Christopher. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News. Thank you.
I've been getting